The person who pulls away is not indifferent. That is the lie they have told you, and more dangerously, the lie they have told themselves. There is something happening in the quiet hours, after midnight, when the noise of the day stops and the architecture of their emotional world becomes impossible to ignore. The avoidant person, the one who seems so cold, so detached, so utterly unbothered by your absence, they are doing something in those dark, silent hours that would completely reframe everything you thought you understood about why they left, why they went quiet, why they keep choosing distance over connection. And here is what makes this so psychologically fascinating and so painful. They do not understand it themselves. They have built an entire identity around not needing people, around being fine, around the story that solitude is strength and attachment is weakness. But the night does not care about their story. The night strips everything back, and what remains, when all the armor comes off, is something far more human, far more desperate, and far more tragic than simple coldness. Stay with this, because what you are about to understand will not just explain their behavior, it will force you to look at your own. The avoidant attachment style is not a personality quirk. It is not a preference, the way some people prefer coffee over tea or silence over music. It is a survival architecture, built brick by brick during the earliest years of a human life, constructed under conditions where emotional need was either ignored, punished, or made to feel like a burden too heavy for anyone to carry. To understand what an avoidant does at night, you must first understand what they did as a child. You must go back to the beginning, because that is where the night behavior was born. Picture a child who reaches out, not dramatically, not with tantrums or manipulation, but with the simple, honest need that every child carries. The need to be held, the need to be seen, the need to have someone look at them and say, without words, that their existence is welcome, that their emotions are not a problem to be managed, but a reality to be honored. Now picture that reaching out being met, consistently, with distance, with a parent who was physically present but emotionally absent, with a household where vulnerability was treated as weakness, where crying was embarrassing, where saying, "I need you," produced either silence or irritation. That child learned something devastating. They learned that need itself is the danger, not the absence of love, but the act of wanting it. This is the foundation upon which the entire avoidant psychological structure rests, and it is crucial that you understand the sophistication of what that child did next, because it was not weakness, it was genius, in the most tragic sense of the word. That child rewired their own nervous system. They learned to suppress the internal signal of longing before it could even reach conscious awareness. Neuroscientists have documented this. Avoidantly attached individuals show less activation in emotional processing regions when exposed to attachment-related stimuli, not because they feel less, but because the suppression mechanism kicks in so early and so efficiently that the feeling never fully surfaces. They did not become cold, they became armored, and the armor was so well fitted, worn for so long, that they forgot it was armor at all. They began to believe the armor was their actual skin. So when this person enters your life, and they pull away, and they go quiet, and they seem completely unaffected, they are not lying to you deliberately. They are performing the only emotional script they were ever handed. The script that says, distance is safety, independence is dignity, need is humiliation. And yet, and this is the part that breaks open everything, the script does not hold at night. The daylight hours are manageable for an avoidant. There is structure, there is work, there are tasks and goals and the forward momentum of a life that has been carefully arranged to minimize the moments when emotional reality can intrude. An avoidant is often extraordinarily competent in the world, professionally successful, socially functional, capable of warmth in controlled doses. During the day, the machinery of avoidance runs smoothly, efficiently, almost invisibly. They can convince themselves, and everyone around them, that they are fine, that they are beyond the messiness of emotional need, that they have, through discipline or evolution or simple preference, transcended the vulnerability that other people seem so burdened by. The night destroys that illusion completely. When the tasks are done, when the screens go dark, when there is no meeting to prepare for and no distraction left to reach for, the nervous system begins to surface what it has been suppressing all day. This is not metaphor, this is neurobiology. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, planning, and the kind of rational override that avoidants depend on heavily, loses dominance in the hours approaching sleep. The limbic system, older, rawer, the part of the brain that houses attachment circuitry begins to speak more loudly. And what it says has nothing to do with the avoidant's carefully constructed narrative about who they are and what they need. What it says is, you miss them. Not in a gentle, wistful way, in the way that an amputee feels a phantom limb, the signal coming from a place that no longer has a physical referent, searingly real despite every logical argument against it. The avoidant lies in the dark, and the thought arrives, unbidden, unwanted, deeply inconvenient. A specific memory, the particular way you laughed, the weight of your presence in a room, something you said once that landed differently than you knew. And for a moment, a long, undefended moment, the armor fails. The suppression mechanism, exhausted by a full day of labor, cannot hold the feeling back. The longing surfaces, full and clear and devastating. And here is what they do with it. This is the part that matters most, and the part that explains so much of the behavior that leaves partners of avoidance feeling confused and crazy and insufficient. The avoidant does not reach out. They do not pick up the phone. They do not send the message that is composing itself in their chest, the one that says, I think about you more than I let you know. I am not as fine as I look. The distance I keep is not evidence of your inadequacy. It is evidence of my fear. Instead, they do something else entirely. They rationalize. With extraordinary speed and sophistication, the analytical mind reasserts itself against the emotional surge. They begin to construct arguments, internally, in the dark, for why the distance is correct, why the relationship was problematic, why you were too needy or too intense, or why the timing was wrong, or why they are simply not built for this kind of closeness. The rationalization is not cynical, it is desperate. It is the only tool they have ever been given to manage the unbearable discomfort of wanting something they believe will ultimately destroy them. Because that is what attachment means to an avoidant at the deepest level. Not comfort, not companionship, not the reasonable human experience of loving and being loved. It means exposure. It means handing someone else the power to do what was done in childhood. To look at your need and find it disgusting, burdensome, too much. Every relationship carries that risk for them, encoded at such a foundational level that it operates beneath conscious thought. Getting close means getting hurt, not might, means. It is, to their nervous system, a mathematical certainty. So the night ritual becomes this. The longing surfaces, the rationalization suppresses it, and then, if the longing is particularly strong, if you were particularly present in their life, if the connection was real enough to break through even their considerable defenses, something else happens. They engage in what psychologists would call proximity-seeking behavior at a safe remove. They look at your social media, they read old messages, they might type something and delete it. They might drive past a place you both went, in their mind if not in their car. They circle the connection without ever entering it, the way a cold person stands near a fire without allowing themselves to move close enough to actually feel warmth. This behavior is not manipulation. It needs to be said clearly and directly because many people in relationships with avoidance interpret the hot and cold pattern as a calculated power play. It is not. It is a person at war with themselves, enacting that war in the most confusing possible way because they have never developed the internal language to do anything else. They were never taught. The adults in their formative environment modeled either emotional unavailability or, in some cases, the kind of inconsistent love that made closeness feel like walking through a field of landmines. They learned to need no one, and now, in the dark, needing someone, they have no map. There is a particular kind of loneliness that only the avoidant knows. It is not the loneliness of someone who has never been loved. It is the loneliness of someone who has stood at the edge of love, felt its warmth, understood instinctively what it could mean, and then walked away from it, not because they did not want it, but because the wanting itself felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The drop was not imagined. To them, it was the only logical conclusion. And so they walked back from the edge, back into the cold, back into the familiar territory of self-sufficiency that had kept them safe since childhood. And in the dark of night, alone in the life they so carefully constructed to need no one, they feel the full weight of that choice pressing down on them like stone. Understand this clearly. The avoidant is not winning. Whatever victory the distance may appear to represent, whatever strength the detachment may project in daylight hours, the night tells the true story. And the true story is one of profound internal conflict. Two forces, each completely real, each completely powerful, pulling in opposite directions with everything they have. On one side, the longing for genuine connection, for the specific warmth of the specific person they pushed away, for the version of themselves that felt, however briefly, like more than just a functioning machine moving through a constructed life. On the other side, the terror, ancient, bone-deep, entirely irrational by adult standards and entirely reasonable by the standards of the child who built it. The terror that says, if you let someone in, truly in, they will see what is actually there, and what is actually there is not enough. That is the core wound of avoidant attachment, not simply fear of intimacy in the abstract, fear of being truly seen and found inadequate. Every wall they build, every time they pull back, every time they manufacture reasons why the relationship will not work, it is all circling back to that single, devastating belief that they are, at the center of themselves, too much or not enough, deficient in some fundamental way that closeness would expose. And so closeness must be prevented, not because the other person is not worthy, not because the relationship is genuinely wrong, but because the risk of revelation is too catastrophic to bear. This is why the night behavior is so significant psychologically, because in the night, when the defenses come down, the avoidant gets a glimpse of a different truth. They feel the missing. They feel the specific texture of your absence in a way that their daytime architecture is designed to prevent them from feeling. And for a few minutes or an hour, or sometimes the entire length of a sleepless night, they are in contact with what they actually want, underneath the fear, underneath the armor, underneath the story they have told themselves and everyone around them. They want what every human being wants, to be known, to be chosen, to matter to someone in a way that is not conditional on their performance or their competence or their ability to maintain the appearance of not needing anything. The tragedy is not that they feel this. The tragedy is what they do in the morning. Because morning comes, and with it, the return of daylight cognition, the reassertion of the prefrontal cortex, the reinstatement of all the mechanisms that keep the emotional world at manageable distance. And what happened in the night, the longing, the circling, the quiet devastation of missing you, gets filed away, reclassified, reframed as weakness, as momentary irrationality, as evidence that they need to strengthen their resolve rather than soften it. The morning self looks back at the night self with something close to contempt. You were being emotional. You were losing perspective. This is exactly the kind of thing that gets people hurt. Pull yourself together. And they do. They pull themselves together with extraordinary efficiency. They go back to their life, back to the distance, back to the carefully maintained posture of someone who has everything under control and needs nothing from anyone. And if you cross their path that day, if you send a message, if you reach out, if you offer some version of the connection they spent the night privately aching for, they respond with the daytime self, measured, contained, perhaps a little cold, perhaps overly practical, perhaps with the specific kind of detachment that makes you feel like you imagined the entire intimacy between you, like you built a cathedral in your mind and they are standing there telling you there is no building. This disconnect is not cruelty, though it functions as cruelty. It is dissociation, the complete severance between the night self who feels and the day self who manages. And it is one of the most disorienting experiences available in human relationships, to be on the receiving end of it. To know at some level that the person in front of you is not showing you the whole picture, to feel the warmth that occasionally breaks through despite their control, and to watch it get shut down the moment it becomes too real. To love someone who is simultaneously present and completely unreachable. Here is what that does to you, and why it matters that you understand it honestly. When you spend time in relationship with an avoidant, when you have learned to read the micro-expressions of warmth, when you have felt the moments of genuine connection that do break through, when you have experienced the specific intimacy that becomes possible in the rare moments when their guard comes down, you do not fall in love with who they pretend to be. You fall in love with who they actually are, underneath. And that person is real. That person who surfaces in the night, who misses you, who circles your memory in the dark, that is not an illusion. That is the human being that years of protective architecture have been built to conceal. The problem is that you cannot love someone into dismantling their own armor. That is one of the hardest truths in all of relational psychology, and one of the ones most people resist most vigorously because it feels like a defeat. It feels like it should be possible, if only you loved them the right way, consistently enough, patiently enough, without triggering their defenses, that they would eventually feel safe enough to open. And sometimes, in partial measure, that is true. safety does help, consistency does matter, but the foundational work of dismantling an attachment pattern that was built in the first years of life, under conditions of emotional deprivation or inconsistency, that work cannot be done by a partner. It can only be done by the avoidant themselves, in deliberate, sustained confrontation with the interior life they have spent decades avoiding. And most of them are not doing that work. Not because they are bad people, not because they do not feel, the night proves they feel, but because the work requires them to go toward the very thing their entire psychological structure was built to move away from. It requires them to sit with vulnerability, with need, with the terror of being seen, not for a moment, not in a controlled dose, but as a sustained practice of self-confrontation that is genuinely one of the most difficult things a human being can undertake. Most people, absent a crisis severe enough to make the cost of avoidance greater than the cost of change, will not voluntarily walk into that kind of pain. So they continue. The night cycle continues. The missing continues. Underground, unspoken, surfacing only in the dark when no one is watching and the armor is too tired to hold. And you, on the other side of the silence they have placed between you, wonder if you imagined it all. Wonder if the connection was real. Wonder what you did wrong, what you could have done differently, why you were not enough to make them stay. You were enough. That was never the variable. The variable was always their capacity, not their feeling, their capacity, to move toward what they felt instead of away from it. And that capacity is not something you could have given them, no matter how much you wanted to, no matter how patiently you waited, no matter how carefully you managed yourself to avoid triggering their withdrawal. It lives inside them, in a place that no external love has ever been able to reach without their own deliberate cooperation. Something shifts when you truly absorb this understanding, not intellectually, not as a concept you can recite, but in the body, in the place where the grief of this kind of relationship actually lives. Something moves from confusion into clarity, and clarity, even when it is painful, is always more useful than the fog of not knowing. Because the fog is what keeps you circling. The fog is what keeps you replaying conversations, searching for the moment you said the wrong thing, constructing alternate versions of events in which you handled it differently, and they stayed. Clarity ends the circling. Clarity says, this was never a mystery with you at the center of it. This was always a story about them, about what was done to them before you ever arrived, about a wound so old it predates your entire existence in their life. Carrying that clarity is not easy. There is a particular grief that comes with understanding the avoidant fully, because full understanding removes the comfortable villainization. It is much simpler, in a certain way, to conclude that they are simply cold, simply selfish, simply incapable of love in any meaningful form. That conclusion is clean. It allows anger, and anger at least has energy in it, forward momentum, the feeling of standing on solid ground. But it is not accurate. And living inside an inaccurate story about someone who mattered to you is its own kind of trap, one that keeps you psychologically tethered to them long after the relationship has ended, because unresolved complexity demands resolution. The accurate story is harder to hold because it contains both things simultaneously. They were real. The connection was real. The feeling they have for you, surfacing in the night when no performance is required, is real. And they are also, in their current state, genuinely unable to give you what a real relationship requires. Both of these things are true at the same time, and the human mind desperately wants to collapse that tension into a single clean verdict. Either it was real and therefore salvageable, or it was not real and therefore dismissible. The truth that it was real and is still for now impossible, that truth requires a maturity of grief that very few people are ever taught to practice. This is where the conversation must turn toward you. Because understanding the avoidance night behavior, understanding the psychology and the neurobiology and the childhood architecture that produces it, none of that is ultimately useful if it only deepens your sympathy for them at the expense of your clarity about yourself. The question that matters, the question that requires the same brutal honesty you have been applying to understanding them, is this. What does it mean about you that this is the relationship you found yourself in? What does it mean that the connection you fell most deeply into was with someone whose entire relational structure is organized around being unreachable? This is not blame. Blame is not the point, and anyone who uses psychological insight as a weapon of self-flagellation has fundamentally misunderstood what insight is for. But there is something worth examining, with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, about the pattern of being drawn to emotional unavailability. For some people, It replicates something familiar: a parent who was loving but distant, a childhood in which affection was inconsistent, a formative experience that taught them, just as surely as the avoidant was taught their lesson, that love is something you have to earn through patience and pursuit. That real connection is something that exists just beyond reach, and the reaching itself is the closest thing to intimacy available. If that resonates, and for many people in relationships with avoidance, it will resonate with uncomfortable precision, then the work is not only about understanding them, the work is about understanding why their particular kind of unavailability felt, at some level, like home. Why the uncertainty was tolerable, even compelling. Why the moments of warmth, precisely because they were rare and hard-won, felt more valuable than the consistent warmth offered by someone with secure attachment. The anxious and the avoidant find each other with extraordinary reliability, drawn together by a complementarity that feels like chemistry, but functions like a wound recognizing another wound. The anxiously attached person, in the presence of an avoidant, activates into their fullest relational expression. They pursue, they accommodate, they become exquisitely attuned to the avoidant's emotional weather, reading microsignals and adjusting themselves in real time in an attempt to maintain whatever degree of closeness is available. And this pursuit, paradoxically, confirms the avoidant's deepest belief, that intimacy means being overwhelmed, that a partner's need is a demand that will consume them, so they withdraw further. And the withdrawal activates the anxious person's attachment alarm more intensely, and the cycle accelerates, each person's behavior making the other's worst fears feel completely justified, until the relationship becomes a perfect closed loop of mutual wounding. Understanding this dynamic does not make it your fault. It makes it your responsibility, which is a completely different thing. Fault looks backward and assigns blame for what has already happened. Responsibility looks forward and asks what you are going to do with what you now understand. And what you now understand, if you have been honest in this examination, is that the pattern is not random. The people you are most powerfully attracted to, the connections that feel most alive and most devastating in equal measure, they are telling you something about your own unfinished interior work. Something about the model of love you absorbed early, the template against which all subsequent relationships are unconsciously measured. The avoidant misses you at night. That is true. They lie in the dark, and the suppression mechanism fails, and the longing surfaces, and you are there, present in their mind, with a specificity and an ache that would probably surprise you if you could see it. And simultaneously, you must hold this simultaneously, that missing does not translate into action. It does not translate into the reaching out, the showing up, the sustained vulnerability that genuine relationship requires. The feeling is real. The capacity to act on the feeling is absent, and a relationship cannot be built on feeling alone, no matter how genuine, no matter how intense. A relationship is built on behavior, on the repeated daily choice to move toward rather than away, on the willingness to be seen even when being seen feels dangerous, on the accumulated evidence, demonstrated through action over time, that another person can be trusted with your actual interior life. The avoidant, in their current state, cannot make that choice consistently. They can make it in moments, and those moments are real, and they matter, and they are part of why this is so difficult. But consistent, sustained movement toward intimacy requires them to do the one thing their entire psychological structure was built to prevent: to feel the fear and go toward connection anyway, not once, not when the feeling becomes overwhelming enough to temporarily override the defense mechanism, but as a practice, as a daily, deliberate dismantling of the walls that once kept them safe and now keep them imprisoned. You have been waiting for someone to choose you who has not yet learned to choose themselves. Read that again, slowly, and let it land in the place where you have been carrying this. The avoidant who misses you in the dark, who circles your memory in the silent hours, who feels everything they refuse to show, they are not your assignment. Their healing is not your purpose. Their potential is not your promise. And the love you have been pouring into the space between you and someone who keeps moving the distance further, that love is not wasted, but it is dangerously misdirected. The most confronting question you will face after everything you now understand is not whether they will change. That question belongs to them entirely. The question that belongs to you, the one that demands an honest answer right now, tonight, not eventually, is whether you are willing to redirect the extraordinary capacity for love and loyalty you have demonstrated towards someone who meets you in the daylight. Not just in stolen moments of nighttime longing, not in potential, in presence, in consistent, chosen, daily action. You deserve someone who does not make you feel like a secret they keep from themselves. Go be that for someone who can receive it.